Leader of Government Business.
Mr. Speaker, I ask leave of Parliament to move a motion without notice.
Is leave granted? Leave granted, Leader of Government Business.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the Minister for Bougainville Affairs presents his ministerial statement.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those against say no. The ayes have it. Mr. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to make an important presentation in relation to the conclusion of the Bougainville referendum process. Before I do my presentation, I'd like to take this opportunity to acknowledge and thank the presence of the Vice President of the Autonomous Bougainville Government, Honorable Ezekiel Massat, and some ABG members who are here up at the gallery to witness this presentation. They're here while the Parliament of the Autonomous Bougainville Government is also in session as I speak. And I'd like to acknowledge them, and specifically I want to commend Honorable Massat's leadership in our discourse in progressing the Bougainville, ongoing Bougainville peace process. I'd like to commend his leadership because he has represented the ABG very well in this ongoing process, and I'd like to comment that. Mr. Speaker, I'll be doing two things today. First, I'll give an update report on the Bougainville process. Second, I'll be presenting, after my statement, I'll be presenting the draft sessional order for Parliament to adopt. Before I do that, I've noticed confusion in the public area regarding what we are doing now. Let me just clear that by saying that what is coming before the Parliament now is not the referendum result on Bougainville. I'd like to be very clear on that, and I'd like the House and everyone to take note of that. What is coming before this House today is not the Bougainville referendum result. And before I go to the detail of my report, I'd like to clear that by saying that in this Parliament's final decision-making process, there'll be 4 phases in this process. The first is the tabling of the Bipartisan Parliamentary Committee's report, which was done on the 2nd of June last week by the Chairman, Honorable Marat. The second phase is the presentation of the sessional order, which I'll be doing it today. The third phase, after the sessional order is adopted by the House, as the House deems fit, the third phase would be that the presentation of the consultation report and the Bougainville referendum result after the sessional order is adopted. And the final phase is that after the presentation of the consultation report and the referendum result and the debates have ensued, final vote on the referendum result following the process in the sessional order will take place. Our Prime Minister has indicated that that decision and the government position is to happen on or by 30th of August. With that, Mr. Speaker, I now am going to give an update report on the consultation process and the referendum process in relation to the ongoing Bougainville peace process. Mr. Speaker, I rise before the House today to provide an important update on the Bougainville peace process and to outline the approach that will be taken to bring the results of the referendum on Bougainville's political future to the National Parliament for deliberation. Since the referendum was held in the latter part of 2019, the government has undertaken extensive work to progress the post-referendum consultation process. This statement sets out the background to that work, the consultations undertaken to date, the national government's position on the Melanesian framework, and the responsibilities of this Parliament. It also outlines the role of Parliament under Section 342 of the National Constitution, the proposal to bring forward the results by way of a sessional order, and the next steps required to bring this matter to a responsible and lawful conclusion. Mr. Speaker, Bougainville's journey to this point has been long, painful, and deeply significant for our nation. The Bougainville conflict, which erupted in 1988, was grounded in long-standing grievance relating to identity, land, and the impacts of the Panguna mine. The conflict resulted in thousands of deaths, widespread displacement, and destruction of infrastructure and livelihoods. It remains one of the most traumatic chapters in our nation's short history. The Bougainville Peace Agreement, signed in 2001, brought an end to the decade-long conflict and established 3 pillars for peace. First, autonomy. Second, weapons disposal. Third, a guaranteed referendum on Bougainville's future political status. The Bougainville Peace Agreement was given constitutional force through the insertion of Part 14 into the National Constitution and the enactment of the Organic Law on Peace Building in Bougainville, Autonomous Bougainville Government and Bougainville Referendum, 2002. This created the Autonomous Bougainville Government, established the autonomy arrangements that are currently in place, and guaranteed that referendum would be held no earlier than 10 years and no later than 15 years after the first Autonomous Bougainville Government election. Mr. Speaker, the referendum was conducted in 2019, and 97.7% of Bougainvilleans voted in favor of independence over the alternative option of greater autonomy. It is important to note that under the terms of the Bougainville Peace Agreement, and as reflected in Section 342 of the National Constitution, these results are not binding but must be tabled in the National Parliament for a final decision. It is non-binding in the sense that it is subject to the National Parliament's decision. This is a position that both governments respect. Since 2019, the national government and the Autonomous Bougainville Government have engaged in a series of structured consultations to determine how the referendum results should be brought before the National Parliament. These consultations have taken place through the joint supervisory body established by the Constitution, the joint post-referendum consultations, and more recently, the joint moderated consultations. Each stage has sought to clarify constitutional issues, establish a roadmap for tabling the results, and build a shared understanding of the political pathway ahead. Mr. Speaker, the first major milestone was the Kokopo Joint Statement of May 2021, which directed technical teams to address the meaning of ratification, the constitutional process for tabling the results, and the development of a joint roadmap. This was followed by the WABEG roadmap in July 2021, which set an aspirational time frame for a political settlement between 2025 and 2027. The Port Moresby Joint Statement of December 2021 reaffirmed the need for a clear mechanism to bring the referendum results to the National Parliament, leading to what we call Erakone Covenant in April of 2022. The Covenant committed both governments to tabling the results of the referendum in the 11th Parliament and allowed for the development of constitutional regulations pursuant to Section 349 of the Constitution to guide the process. Mr. Speaker, despite significant efforts, technical work on the constitutional regulations stalled, unfortunately, due to divergence or differing legal interpretations, particularly around the meaning of ratification and the voting majority required in Parliament. As a result, the Joint Supervisory Body agreed in July 2023 to use a sessional order rather than constitutional regulations to prescribe the process for tabling the referendum result. The content of this sessional order remains subject to continued discussion between the Speaker of our National Parliament and the Speaker of the Bougainville House of Representatives as agreed under the Melanesian Agreement signed on the 26th of June 2025, and I will talk more about that process later in this statement. Mr. Speaker, to assist in resolving outstanding issues, both governments agreed to engage an independent moderator, leading to the joint moderated consultations held in 2025 in Port Moresby and Burnham in New Zealand, chaired by former New Zealand Governor-General Sir Jerry Mataparae. These consultations culminated in the Melanesian Agreement signed on 26 June 2025. The agreement commits both governments to jointly develop a Melanesian framework, which is a structured political pathway that may form part of the joint consultation report to be presented to Parliament. It also reaffirms the constitutional role of Parliament under Section 342, the need for a bipartisan parliamentary committee to support awareness, and the importance of public messaging to ensure national understanding of the whole process. Mr. Speaker, the national government's position is grounded in constitutional law. The Bougainville Peace Agreement and the need to preserve national unity while respecting the aspirations of our beloved Bougainville people. The government maintains that the National Parliament is the final decision-making authority on the referendum results. Section 342, subsection 2 of the Constitution requires that I, as Minister for Bougainville Affairs, table the results of the referendum, after which the National Parliament may make any decision it considers appropriate. On this point, I need to be clear. The national government has rejected the autonomous Bougainville government's interpretation of the term ratification in the Bougainville Peace Agreement and any suggestion that the National Parliament is required to merely endorse or accept the referendum results. The term ratification was deliberately omitted from Section 342 of the National Constitution to avoid confusion with the treaty ratification provisions of the Constitution and to ensure the National Parliament retains full discretion. The Supreme Court has repeatedly affirmed that position, that the National Parliament is not a mere rubber stamp for executive decisions and must be free to debate and determine matters of national importance. The referendum results, while politically significant, are not binding and must be considered in accordance with our constitutional laws and subject to the National Parliament's decision-making authority. Mr. Speaker, Section 342 of the Constitution places the National Parliament at the center of the post-referendum process. As Minister, I must table the results and the outcome of our joint consultations, and the National Parliament must make a decision. However, the Constitution does not prescribe the procedure for tabling, debating, or voting on the referendum results. To address this procedural gap or vacuum, the national government and the autonomous Bougainville government have agreed that the National Parliament will adopt a sessional order. Mr. Speaker, the sessional order will establish the process for introducing the referendum results and the joint consultation report, the structure and timing of debate, and the applicable voting threshold. Mr. Speaker, agreement on the voting thresholds required for both adoption of the sessional order and consideration of the referendum results has been a long-standing point of contention between the national government and the autonomous Bougainville government. To resolve this, both governments have taken the speakers of the National Parliament and the Bougainville House of Representatives to finalize the sessional order. Mr. Speaker, the respective speakers have consulted on this matter. The sessional order was largely agreed with, the only difference being the required voting thresholds. Following the consultations, I wish to inform the Honourable House that the Leader of the National Parliament, the Speaker, has now finalized, in yourself, Mr. Speaker, has now finalized a sessional order to govern the parliamentary consideration of the Bougainville referendum results. Mr. Speaker, we have now embarked on the final steps of our journey in bringing the Bougainville referendum results to the National Parliament. This was initiated last week on the 2nd of June with the tabling of the report of the Bipartisan Parliamentary Committee on Bougainville by Chairman Honorable Marat. As you will have already noted, the committee is playing a critical role in preparing members of the House for this debate, ensuring so that we are fully informed of the legal, political, and historical context. Mr. Speaker, importantly, the tabling of the report prompted some members to share their initial views. This is an important part of the process, and more views will be required to be shared as we move forward as part of the ongoing discussion and debate. From here, there are a number of further steps that need to be taken. Mr. Speaker, Step one is the adoption of the sessional order. If the motion is supported, the procedural framework for consideration of the referendum results will be established and will result in Step 2, when the referendum results will be tabled together with the joint consultation report and melanation framework, and debates will commence. Step 3, Mr. Speaker, once sufficient time has been given for debates, members will be required for the final vote on the referendum result as declared by the Prime Minister. This will be no later than 30th August 2026. Mr. Speaker, I must advise that following the completion of this statement, that I intend to initiate Step 1 and move the motion to adopt the sessional order. Central to this process is the development of the melanation framework. Mr. Speaker, this melanation framework is being jointly developed by the national government and the autonomous Bougainville government and will form part of the joint consultation report. Its purpose is to provide the national parliament with a clear and practical roadmap of what would follow any decision. Mr. Speaker, the national government's position is that should the national parliament vote in the affirmative to accept the referendum results and support a pathway to independence for Bougainville, this should initiate a phased and carefully managed transition rather than an immediate declaration for independence. It would also require constitutional amendments. Such a transition would be anchored in the progressive transfer of powers under Sections 289 and 290 of the National Constitution, ensuring that Bougainville is equipped with the institutional capacity, fiscal and economic strength, and governance systems necessary to sustain independence. Mr. Speaker, at the same time, we acknowledge that the autonomous Bougainville government has proposed a more accelerated pathway. I note these discussions are ongoing, and they are being conducted in good faith with mutual respect and with a shared commitment to reaching an agreed outcome. Mr. Speaker, as part of the government's commitment to ensuring that this process proceeds in a lawful, orderly, and constitutionally sound manner, legal advice has been sought from a range of senior legal authorities and law firms, including the state solicitor. Mr. Speaker, the advice consistently confirms that the national parliament has an essential constitutional role in considering and determining the outcome of the Bougainville referendum. Importantly, the advice is clear that the referendum result is not self-executing and does not, of itself, automatically confer independence upon Bougainville. Mr. Speaker, the legal advice further confirms that should the national parliament vote to accept the referendum result, Bougainville would not immediately become an independent state under international law. Rather, further constitutional and legal steps would be required, including amendments to Section 2 of the National Constitution to remove Bougainville from the defined area of Papua New Guinea, together with the implementation of further transitional arrangements between the two governments. Mr. Speaker, the legal advice also addresses the implications of a negative parliamentary vote. In the meantime, in the main, Mr. Speaker, the advice indicates that a decision by the national parliament not to accept the referendum result would amount to rejection of the proposal for independence for Bougainville, and unless expressly qualified by the national parliament, would conclude the constitutional process contemplated under Section 342 of the National Constitution. Mr. Speaker, in those circumstances, it is important to note that the proposed arrangements under the Melanesian framework would not be triggered. Whilst the constitutional requirements of Section 342 of the National Constitution would have been satisfied, this would not mean that engagement between the national government and the autonomous Bougainville government comes to an end. Rather, Bougainville would continue to operate under the existing autonomy arrangements established under Part 14 of the National Constitution, unless and until this national parliament determines otherwise in accordance with Section 345 of the Constitution. Mr. Speaker, the legal advice further confirms that a decision not to endorse the referendum result would maintain the current constitutional status quo. Any alternative political settlement, including enhanced autonomy, new government arrangements, or another form of political relationship, would require further consultation, negotiation, and parliamentary approval. Mr. Speaker, regardless of the outcome of the National Parliament's deliberations, both governments would need to consider the future operation of the Bougainville Peace Agreement and Part 14 of the National Constitution to ensure that the legal and political arrangements continue to reflect the realities of the relationship between Papua New Guinea and Bougainville. Mr. Speaker, in summary, the immediate next steps are clear. I must move for the sessional order to be adopted. Once adopted, the national government and the autonomous Bougainville government must finalize the Melanesian framework and complete the joint consultation report. Once these steps are complete, the referendum results, together with the joint consultation report, will be tabled in this House. And before the 30th of August 2026, the 11th Parliament members will then be called upon to make one of the most consequential decisions in our nation's history. Mr. Speaker, whatever decision is made, it must be grounded in law, informed by the Bougainville Peace Agreement, respectful of Bougainville's aspirations, and guided by our shared commitment to peace, unity, and stability. It is therefore critical, when the time comes, that all members of this House take time to consider the context and history of the Bougainville crisis and the proposed way forward. Only through exercising the democratic process can we chart a path forward. Mr. Speaker, over the coming weeks, I will continue to work to finalize the Melanesian framework with my counterpart and Vice President Honorable Massad. As Minister, I remain committed to fulfilling my constitutional obligation, and the government stands ready to work with the autonomous Bougainville government to secure a lasting peace in Bougainville. Mr. Speaker, this will be one of the most important decisions ever taken by this House. It must be a decision grounded in law, informed by history, and respectful of the expressed will of the people of Bougainville. Above all, it must be a decision that preserves peace and secures a stable future for all our people. Mr. Speaker, as Minister, I reaffirm this government's commitment to working in partnership with the autonomous Bougainville government to achieve a lasting and peaceful settlement. We approach this task with humility, with respect, and with a clear understanding of its significance for our nation. Mr. Speaker, with that, I commend this statement to this House.